All right. Well, welcome everybody. First off, tonight I'm going to be doing a couple different drawings. I'm going to be doing kind of like some head construction type stuff and talking about the Reilly Rhythms a little bit. And I'm going to try to do two drawings if I can. Probably spend, I don't know, like kind of two 25-minute sessions on each one. And first up, I was going to show you like a demo I did this morning that actually shows kind of like a quick little color chart that I have students do as an exercise, and just kind of break it down into like 6 really clear values. And then we kind of figure out how to take these values and apply them to a cylinder, and then kind of really focus on getting the edges to read correctly. And it's a pretty good exercise. I mean, I'd recommend everybody do it at some point and do it more than once too, because I mean, it's something that you need to actually be pretty good at. And to understand how to keep a really, really clear value separation, where in the shadow you have all your shadow values, which up here, if you look, I mean, that's kind of like your 4 through 6 type values all exist in that shadow section. And then you have kind of the light values, you know, that 1 through 3 side, kind of all sitting off in the light. And then just really pay attention to edges. And the drawings I'm going to do tonight, they're going to be, I'll only take them up to like the 2 value stage. I mean, I'm probably not going to do any rendering. So I can just kind of focus more on construction and really focus on edges and just looking for like soft edges versus hard edges and trying to get things to read kind of 3-dimensionally as just like a 2-value drawing. You know, basically like this. This was the second half of the demo this morning. So I mean, I really just kind of came in and focused on, you know, getting the soft edges in certain areas versus firm versus hard edges in some areas, and trying to get it to look kind of 3D, you know, with only 2 values. And if you can pull that off, then you can go in and start adding more values on top of that. So that's kind of the goal tonight, is to kind of bring it up to this level, hopefully. And the reference I have is kind of from the online school. So for those of you that are a part of the online school, you might recognize it. I think at least one of these drawings are part of the online school. I don't know, I'm not entirely sure if the other one's on there or not, but they're from the same model. So hang on. Fix my wrinkly paper. So essentially, we're going to start with the big shape of the head, you know, and kind of start with a cranial mass type shape. And in this instance, I mean, she's kind of has her head tilted down a little bit. And I know you guys can't see the reference, which I just from reading the comments on these things before, I know people kind of complain about that. But to be honest, you don't really need to see it. And if you were here in class with me and we had a model, you know, I mean, you wouldn't actually be able to see the model from the same angle as me, and it would kind of force you to just kind of watch me draw. So it's kind of the same effect, more or less. So I don't think you really need to see it. So I know her head's tilted down, so this kind of cranial mass shape that I start with is going to be tilted a bit, you know, instead of, you know, straight. Say if her head's going to be kind of 3/4-ish, usually it would be like that, and then kind of drape the front plane of the head, and then kind of connect the back of the head down into the jaw rhythmically that way. So we're going to take that idea and just kind of turn it a bit. I'm really just looking at this point for the width, and then kind of the angle of the top of the head, and then dropping the side plane of the head down this direction. And then just trying to look and kind of make sure that matches the reference. I think I'm going to adjust it a little bit. You know, so then I'm going to go from the back of the head kind of down through the jaw, which is going to run down this way. And from a 3/4 perspective, I mean, we could kind of end up with something that looks a little bit like a guitar pick, ideally. That doesn't work with everybody. I mean, there's a lot of different types of heads and head shapes out there. But roughly, it's a little guitar picky type shaped. Come in, so that chin's going to connect kind of down in here. Next, I mean, kind of look for like that separation between the ear and the back of the jaw. And I'm kind of looking at the relationship of the ear to the back of the head and how the back of the jaw relates to the back of the head. I can see kind of how much space there needs to be between those two. I can look and say, okay, her ear is going to sit about there. Maybe I can come in a tiny bit, or maybe just angle a little bit more. That looks pretty good. And then that also kind of creates the corner of the jaw. And so I can look at that and know about where that's going to line up with the bottom of the nose, it looks like. Or it should be maybe even a little bit above it. So that's looking pretty good. And then, that ear's going to sit back here a bit. And just think simple shapes right now. For an ear, just drop an oval in there. And then quickly, you can add the center line in. And she's got her head tilted down again. So, that center line is going to be tilted quite a bit. And I can kind of look up there and see how angled it needs to be. Probably not quite as much as I just made it angled. So it's going to sit probably about like that. And then I want to separate out the shape of the face from the hairline. So I can look and just say, okay, I know the hairline is going to sit right about here. Maybe a little bit higher. Well, I don't know, it seems pretty close. And then her hair is covering her ear. So it's actually swooping over this direction. Maybe a little bit straighter that way. And then it's going to kind of come and swoop down that way. Do something like that. So now at this point, I'm just looking at this big shape of the head and checking to make sure that it kind of matches what I'm seeing up on the reference. Come in and kind of find that part, or like separation of the hairline. Her hair is going to kind of come back that direction. And I'd recommend at this point keeping the hair shape pretty soft. You don't want a bunch of hard edges right away in the hair. And then I can use a plumb line, and just kind of look at where that hair is going to change direction and see what's directly below it. And it's about the corner of her chin. So I know from the corner of her chin, I can come straight up and say, okay, that means her hair needs to come that way at that point. It's looking pretty close. I feel like right now this shape's looking maybe a little too wide that direction. Not entirely sure why. I'm going to check this angle. I think this needs to actually come back a little farther. So constantly get back from it and try and look at the whole thing and just make adjustments as you go if you need to. Yeah, it looks a little better. That's going to bring this in a little bit and make the width of that hair shape look more correct. And it's going to swoop out past the ear. Kind of that way, and then kind of back in. At this point, probably add the neck on. I probably should have done that before the hair, actually. Either way is fine. So find kind of neck shape, and then down here we have her neck coming in kind of this way, because she has her head turned like way off to the side. So her trapezius is actually coming up and hitting her chin just about, and coming off kind of this direction. You know, and just stick with long sweeping lines, you know. I mean, everything I've done so far is either a C curve, an S curve, or a straight, and just kind of these long flowing lines that I'm trying to lock together as best I can. You know, and then she has some braids that are coming off this way and actually going over her shoulder.
Brian, one of the viewers wants to know how many times it took you to draw these rhythms before it became second nature.
A lot. I mean, I had to draw these things. Oh, and I'll try and keep repeating the question because I don't know if you guys can hear it or not. I know last time I did this, that was kind of a problem. So the question was how many times I had to draw all these rhythms and headlands before they kind of became second nature. And the answer is many, many, many times. I mean, hundreds to thousands maybe. You know, I mean, I was taking maybe anywhere from 8 to 10 classes a week for 3 years maybe before I would say I got to that point. Which I don't know exactly how many drawings that adds up to, but it's a lot. I mean, I would say hundreds at least. You know, I mean, it's not an easy thing. And especially to get things to become intuitive takes a long time and a lot of effort. Some sort of kind of little hair shape on the end there. Okay, so next, I mean, we're going to break it into thirds, starting from the hairline down to the brow, which is going to sit probably about here, and her head's tilted quite a bit also. I mean, she's like tilted down a little bit and has her head actually tilted kind of that direction. So we're going to have the brow line, the nose line, and the chin. Her nose is going to have to come down a bit. So these should make equal thirds, from the hairline to the brow line, from the brow to the nose line, and the nose down to the chin. You should be able to measure them and have them actually be pretty close to equal thirds, almost exactly. Which looks about right to me. You know, and you can even double check that on the person. Almost everybody fits that kind of generic measurement, but there are exceptions. I mean, me personally, I know my jaw is huge, and that middle third, when you measure it, kind of goes down more to like the top of my chin, but I don't see that very often. Those thirds almost work every single time. I'm gonna look for the inside of this eye socket, kind of in the outside of that keystone shape that kind of sits right in here. And the same thing, kind of rhythmically down to the inside of the eye socket. Kind of looking for where that separation between eye socket and side plane of the nose sits. And then the outside, it's gonna sit somewhere around there. And then the outside of this brow is going to sit about here most likely. And this is a point where you can kind of start locking things together a bit from side to side, which is something you see a lot with the Reilly abstraction and the Reilly method in general, is locking things together from side to side. So visually, they're going to match up. And even though those lines don't end up in the finished drawing, they're going to help kind of create visual relationships between each side of the face and kind of help keep things symmetrical, I guess, and also help lead your eye around the drawing. Come in that way. You can close up the bottom of those sockets, but I usually wait a second to kind of put the nose in first. Kind of come down that way and then down this way. And at first I'm ignoring any sort of I don't know, cartilages or kind of contour that you might get in the nose, and just kind of simplifying and generalizing it a bit. It's going to sit about there. And so then I want to be able to look at where the tip of the nose is versus the edge of the cheek and make sure that space looks correct. You can see this eye is going to sit right about in there. And her cheek, we're going to make sure works kind of in relation to the nose. You know, so that distance looks pretty close to me. You know, and again, I'm using plumb lines constantly to see what's either directly above something or directly across from something. I can tell based on where that nose connection point is, the chin's probably going to need to move this way just a little bit.
Brian, at what point do the thirds of the face become unequal when the head's tilted?
You can tilt it pretty far. Like the thirds of the head stay pretty equal most of the time, and you have to tilt the head either forward or backward or like up or down pretty far before they become distorted. You know, but there is a point where they do start to become distorted. But like right now, what I'm really looking for, like these thirds are pretty much the same, but if you look like the way a cylinder or a box kind of works, and say we took like a cylindrical shape and tilted it down, you know, and said, okay, here's our cylinder. And here's like kind of that center line maybe. You know, if we took this and broke it into thirds, starting here and maybe there, there. I know those aren't perfect thirds, but they'll get the job done. So from there, we can see how those are going to wrap around this cylindrical shape. You know, so mostly I'm trying to make sure these relationships stay intact in the drawing. So now you can see if this is the hairline, you know, and this is our brow line. See, that's the nose line, chin. That ear is going to sit within that middle third, but now since the head's tilted down, the ear is actually sitting above that brow and nose. You know, it gets pushed up, and then same with the back of the jaw, because the back of the jaw would actually sit up here now and move up. You know, so as the head tilts down, the back of the jaw and the ear move up, and then the opposite thing kind of happens when you tilt the head back, you know, and the ear and jaw actually move lower. And then the jaw will actually kind of flatten out a bit. So real quick, I would look for kind of the separation of planes in the nose. You know, maybe look for some of that cartilage shape versus just kind of a simplified shape that'll help separate out that bottom plane from the rest of the nose. It's going to sit right about in there. You know, and then we take this bottom third and we can break that into thirds. That's going to show us where the lips are going to sit. And I think that shadow sits about there. So real quick, again, quick measurement. Looks pretty close. It's on her. No, they're pretty exact. This is pretty close. So now I know that basically that line is going to be like the kind of separation between the top and bottom lip, and then that's going to be the top of the chin. And then that little space between the bottom of the lip and the chin, which I think is called like the manubrium or something, I think. And then that's basically going to be right above there. You know, so at this point, I can come in and kind of find where that muzzle shape is going to sit, you know, and it's going to actually kind of project forward from the center line a bit, this direction. You know, and then same with the chin is going to project forward. You know, and then she's got like a little bit of a smile going on. So her lips, I think, are going to sit about like that. You know, so at this point, I can go back up. I mean, that's enough. I might throw in a line real quick just to help kind of line up where I think the tear ducts are going to go. Right along there, maybe. And if you need to, you can throw in kind of that separation between the top of the eyeball or the eyelid and the actual brow itself, which is going to sit kind of right about in here. And then we'll get kind of that kind of inside plane of the brow, that kind of upper inside section. I don't know how to describe it exactly, but there's like a little pocket up above your eyeball. It sits right about in here. You know, and then complete this brow shape up here, which is going to sit that direction. So that's enough. I mean, at this point, I think I can go in and start kind of blocking in some shadow shapes. And I will come in and lighten it a bit. And knock it back, and then probably just start right in the eye, you know, because I mean, those areas are pretty important, and so you want to get them working kind of early on. You know, I know people sometimes have a tendency to avoid the areas that seem more difficult, but I would kind of recommend doing the opposite and actually go for those areas first to make sure you can get them to work, and then just kind of move on to other areas so you don't kind of end up rendering like a really nice nose and lips and then get stuck on an eye and kind of ruin the whole thing. So again, now I'm just focused on edges, and soft edges versus hard edges, and whether a shape is rounded or more angled or somewhere in between. So there's a fairly soft edge right in here. I kind of jump up here a bit. Getting pretty soft at the top of the brow. And then that shadow shape actually jumps down here a little bit. And ends, and then kind of comes kind of down that way with a bit of a harder edge. And then I'm going to look and say, okay, the eye I think is going to sit kind of right about here. You can usually, depending on the model, kind of find a plane that parallels the nose and separates kind of the side plane of the nose from the cheek. Figure out exactly where that's going to sit, and that should lead you up to the tear duct. So this eye is going to come up this way, jump up, over that way. Again, just kind of get back from it and, you know, take a minute, make sure that size makes sense in terms of, you know, in relation to the rest of the head. Then I'm just going to block in a really simple eye shape. It's going to come up here, jump over a tiny bit, down, up. She's looking off that direction. Now we're getting a little bit, yeah.
At what point do you decide when to move on from the lay-in?
I mean, the point to move in from the lay or move on from the lay-in is tough. I mean, it depends on how far you want to take it and how comfortable you are with the whole process, and how intuitive it is, and how good you are at kind of visualizing the whole thing. But certainly, if you're newer to that process, I would take your time and take the lay-in as far as you can. You know, because I mean, that's certainly going to help get everything lined up and in the right spot. And each part should kind of build on the part before it. But I don't know, it's hard to say. I mean, part of that's just personal preference. You know, I tend to take it farther, I think partly because I teach a lot, so I'm constantly showing people lay-in stuff. But certainly I would say take it as far as you need to in order to make sure you have all the, you know, all the features placed correctly and all the proportions locked down right. You know, so then that shadow's coming up this direction. Off that way, and creating, kind of helping create the thickness of that eyelid. You know, I mean, eyes are difficult. I mean, I don't have time to explain everything that goes into eyes, but certainly like in that, you know, in the head fundamentals class, we spent an entire week just talking about eyeballs and how they work and eye anatomy and all sorts of stuff. Not bad. Then come over to this other side again. This eye is going to be a little bit farther away and probably have a little less detail, but I mean, that one doesn't have much detail yet anyway, so now they're probably going to end up looking about the same. I mean, you can see how methodically these edges have to be created. You know, I mean, you got to really actually take your time as much as you can. I think I'm going to bring this brow shape in a little bit. You know, and then her other eye is pretty extreme. I mean, you got to think about how the eyelid goes up and wraps around the ball of the eye. In that direction. You know, again, just kind of block in. That line I put in earlier is going to kind of help me line up those tear ducts and make sure my eyes line up and make sense. That's not bad. I mean, there's a lot of ways to do this. You don't have to go in and map everything. You know, like if you watch Eric draw, I mean, he's going to actually kind of mask things in more. Like when you watch Jeff draw, he's big on mapping. Eric would more just go and quickly just block in like these large shadow shapes everywhere. and not worry quite so much about mapping, and then maybe go back and adjust edges more later on. So a lot of that is just kind of personal preference. But thinking about, okay, now I have a cast shadow, so that cast shadow is going to be a bit harder up near the object that's casting it. And then it's going to soften up a bit as it moves away from that object. And then that shadow is coming down and hitting the lips, actually. Because her lips are going to sit right about in here. And then one thing that's kind of deceptive about lips is they actually have really soft edges. But since they have a darker local value and that local color kind of changes pretty quickly or abruptly, it makes them appear like they have harder edges than they really do. And then again, I'm going to use a plumb line, make sure I have the corner of the mouth in the right spot, because I feel like it needs to come back a little bit farther maybe. Especially the node right here in the corner of the mouth. I mean, you're going to get some pretty soft edge work. And then, of course, harder edge underneath. And then we have kind of that little shadow underneath the bottom lip. Sitting down here. And then again, it's kind of like a little cast shadow, so it's going to be kind of firm down to maybe like a little bit of a hard edge down here. Not super hard, because we're getting farther away from the light source at this point, so our hard edges aren't going to be as hard as they are up here. A nice soft edge out here. Then again, kind of get back and look at it a little bit. See if I can figure out.
Can you talk a little bit about the purpose of simplifying forms?
Yeah, I mean, the purpose of simplifying forms is just to get the big picture of the head to read accurately without getting caught up in detail. And if you get caught up in detail too quickly, then you can kind of lose sight of that big picture. And I don't know, things will fall apart pretty quick. Like if that big read doesn't work, then nothing else will really work quite right. Like no amount of detail that you add to it will make it better. So partly that simplification helps you just kind of keep track of everything all at once. And hopefully get those big forms to read well and in a way that kind of locks everything together. And yeah, I don't know. And then at that point, once it all works, you can kind of go back and add more detail on top of it. But man, I just know from experience, like if you don't have that big picture read to it working correctly and kind of that three-dimensional look to it at the two value stage, then no amount of detail you add to it is going to really help a whole lot. And then on her cheek, it's tough. There's like a really dark halftone kind of on her cheek, and I think I'm just going to go ahead and kind of push it into shadow. I'll give it probably a little bit more of like a dramatic look, but I think that's okay. It's going to be a really soft edge out on this cheek. I mean, probably the softest edge in the whole drawing. That's going to kind of come down and match up with this kind of part of her cheek out here. Again, pretty soft edge down here. So you can see how much edge variation we're going for. I mean, how soft that is, comes into something that's a little bit more firm, and then has a hard edge down underneath here, back into a softer edge, back into a more firm edge. I mean, I'm just looking for variation everywhere, as much as possible. I mean, within reason. Then we're gonna have a cast shadow, which is coming down and kind of hitting her trapezius, and then kind of jumping off this direction. And cast shadows, I mean, they tend to have harder edges, but in this case, it's being cast from her head. So the object that's being cast from is pretty far away from her head. So I'm going to keep it pretty soft. And it's going to kind of jump up here, hit this kind of tendinous area. So that's looking pretty good to me. I think it's kind of well within reason. At this point, you can come in and maybe try and hit that contour a little bit better. But man, you do not want to get caught up in contour too early. Just think simplified forms at first. And then I might get a little bit of this other side of her cheek. There's like a little bit of shadow over here, which since I kind of blocked it over here, I kind of feel like I need to do it over here too. Otherwise it's going to look a little odd. Just a little bit of shadow right there. Not bad. I mean, maybe lock down this ear shape a little better at this point. And again, I'm going to look at the relationship between where her ear ends and her nose. It should end maybe about nostril level, a little bit above it. So it's coming down from underneath her hair and then kind of coming over that direction, connecting about there. Not bad. So I mean, at this point, we can go in and start filling this stuff in. And hopefully, if we did it at least a little bit right, we can kind of end up with something that looks kind of three-dimensional, but is only two values. So I'm going to come in and try to be really careful not to accidentally create a bunch of core shadows everywhere, which is pretty easy to do when you start filling this stuff in, to end up with like a darker line. And I'll probably end up with a little bit of that somewhere just because it's kind of difficult to avoid. But you want it close enough in value in these shapes that when you kind of squint and look at it, it all turns into one value. I'll try and do it dark enough. You want to get it reasonably dark. Most people don't go dark enough right off the bat, and they end up kind of having to redo it a number of times. So I'm going to try to hit like a good middle value. Shrink up that shape a little bit. There we go. We have that little bit of shadow down here on this bottom eyelid. add a little bit right there just so I kind of know where it goes, even though that's not really that much in shadow. You know, fill in this side. Fill in this eye shape, and right now just keeping it super simple eye shape, you know. It's later on that I'll go in and kind of find where exactly where that top plane of the eye versus that bottom plane of the upper eyelid, you know, and the top plane of the bottom eyelid, and kind of separate all those little parts. I'm not really worried about that right now. Mostly I just want to get this stuff to read correctly. You know, and I can adjust the edges a little bit as I go along, as I need to. And this part, I mean, there's no real trick to it. It just kind of takes enough dexterity that you can kind of lay down some really even tone. And at first, you know, you're gonna have to do it kind of slowly and carefully. And as you get better at it, you can do it more quickly. Next, let's see, there's kind of that cast shadow coming off the hair a little bit right in here. And down into there. Not bad, it's looking pretty smooth. And then this area, I mean, again, it's just gonna take some patience and just kind of making that same stroke over and over. It's a little tough with the wolf carbon. I mean, I'm used to using the Conte, and recently, I don't know, they've been unsharpenable for some reason. Their production quality dropped quite a bit, so I had to switch over to a mix of kind of like the Generals and the Wolf Carbon.
Can you clarify the difference between something reading correctly and getting good likeness?
Yeah, the difference between something reading correctly and a likeness, I mean, it's kind of tough. You know, you can have draw a head that looks correct, you know, and is certainly within the realm of possibility and all the proportions read correct, but you don't have that person's likeness. You know, it just doesn't look like them. Versus, you know, sometimes you can have a drawing that kind of captures a person's likeness, but there's something kind of off with it also. Or even something like a caricature that really captures a person's likeness, but intentionally distorts things, you know. So you just kind of have to be careful and kind of be aware of the type of look that you're going for and kind of what your goals are. And, you know, just kind of know the difference between the two and be able to look at something and say, you know, I mean, it kind of looks like them, but I don't know, there's something off with it, you know, and then kind of go back in and check all your measurements and double check things. But sometimes, I mean, if you're doing like a illustration or something, like a likeness might not be all that important, you know, if you just shot some reference for it, you know, so it might be okay to just go in and draw a really nice head and then just use the reference for lighting and kind of some basic construction stuff, and then not really worry about likeness too much, you know, so it just kind of depends on the situation, you know. So then she has really dark hair, You know, so I'm gonna actually put in kind of a darker local value for the hair. In fact, this shadow value that I put in here, I think I'm gonna use as the local value for the hair also. So I'm gonna come in and just fill in all this hair real quick.
As a follow-up question, if you were working on a commissioned portrait, how long do you think you'd spend on the lay-in portion?
Man, if I was working on a commissioned portrait, I would spend as long as I needed to on the lay-in to get it looking absolutely correct. You know, and make sure I really capture that likeness and proportionally everything works. And, you know, I mean, unless I was really, really confident and had been doing this for a really long time and confident in my abilities to skip that step, then I, you know, might do that. But certainly right now, I don't think I'm quite at that point. You know, I would do a really nice lay-in no matter how long it took, which is tough if you have like deadlines or something, you know. You might kind of be forced to skip it a little bit, but I wouldn't personally. But I also, I don't know, I just enjoy the process. I know some people get bored doing lay-ins and want to move on to all the rendering and stuff. So say this is going to be like my local value for the hair, and then come in and separate out where the shadow on the hair is. You know, we're going to have a highlight running kind of right in through here, kind of where that change in plane on the top of the head is. So it's going to be kind of like this way. Run along there so we can add like some of this kind of highlight. Type shape a little bit. You know, but then actually come in and separate out where the shadow of the hair is, which is actually going to sit back here a bit farther. Kind of has some softer edges to it. And that hair shadow is going to be pretty dark. Sit maybe around there somewhere. Try and get some variety to it, some variation, because it's hair. But you don't want to go in there and draw individual hairs either. I mean, you just want to kind of imply hair as best you can. So I'm going to come in and say, okay, that's separation between hair and where the ear was right about there. We had that muscle running back through there. So then the rest of this I'm going to darken up pretty dark, you know, because that shadow value in the hair is going to be really dark.
When you're applying tone, do you stick to shading in one direction? Do you go back and forth?
When I'm applying tone, I try to stick with shading in one direction as much as possible. But when I get into really big areas like that, I might mix it up a little bit. But generally, like in all these areas down in the face, I was shading all one direction, you know, and not only one direction, but in the same, I don't know, like same direction, and then only on the downstroke, you know, so it was like downstroke, down, 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 and then just kind of stacking those up, only doing it really fast, you know, and almost like you're beating an egg or something, and doing that so fast that it just kind of looks like you're going crazy on it, but it's more controlled than it looks. Come in here, lock that hair shape down. You know, like right now, it looks like I'm doing lines kind of back and forth like that, but I'm not. I'm actually just really quickly doing that and just fast enough that it kind of creates the illusion of the other one.
So how would you approach a more flat-light situation where the light and shadow separation isn't well defined and the facial structure isn't as obvious?
I mean, at that point, what was it? Like the facial, oh, like there's not a lot of like obvious shadows and type of stuff. Not as high contrast. I mean, that's kind of tough. I would, if in like a low contrast situation, I would use the same type of lay-in to figure out where all those shadows go or where all the features go. And then ultimately you're just gonna, rather than put in shadow shapes, you're gonna be dealing with really subtle halftone shapes, you know, which is a tough way to draw. I mean, that's certainly more advanced than this kind of like lit from one direction type drawing, you know, which is something we use at the school a lot because it's a good way to learn. But certainly out in the real world, you know, you're probably gonna end up doing a lot of like dual lighting and more interesting type stuff, which is more difficult. But then, yeah, you do end up dealing a lot more in halftone and just really, really subtle halftone differences. Here, so that's pretty much the two value for the hair. There's a little bit of like shadow shapes in here for the braids. I might try to capture real quick. I'm not really sure I have them working correctly, but and then each of these braids has like a little highlight and its own little kind of value hierarchy to it. You know, certainly the highlights you get down on these braids that are pretty far away from the light source aren't going to be nearly as bright as the highlight up near the top of the head. I'm going to go, last thing I would do, because I'm not going to take these past the two value stage really, because I want to stick with construction stuff. I'm going to darken the hair over here. It looks too light compared to what's going on this side. And bring this up a tiny bit. I mean, it looks pretty good to me for that kind of two value stage. I think it's about right. So I mean, this is the level I would bring it up to before I start really rendering anything. good. So yeah, I'm gonna take a quick break and then I'm gonna do a second one of these in after about a 5-minute break maybe. I need a little more shadow. Down in there a little bit. Yeah, I think it looks pretty good. Anyway, I'm gonna take a quick break and then I'll be right back. I'll go drink some water. And then we'll do another one. Okay, cool. It's Tommy. What's up? Okay, so I'm gonna move this thing so I don't sit on it. So as I was standing back there drinking water, kind of bothered me that I put this highlight in here, because I feel like it's too early for that. Because, you know, I have the whole face as like a 2-value drawing, and then the hair is a 2-value drawing, but starting with a darker local value. So I'm actually going to come in and eliminate that highlight, because when you add that highlight, you actually add a 3rd value. And we only want 2 values right now. So I'm going to try and get some of this darker stuff I put in there and then see if I can just kind of blend it out. Maybe it'll work, maybe it won't, I don't know. It might end up looking worse. I'll try and fix this more when this thing's over. See if I can get rid of some of these little things just so you guys don't have to sit here and watch me do this. Although I do realize that I'm saying that as I sit here and make you watch me do this, which is a little weird. Anyway, I'll move on. So the next one, right, it's gonna be the same model, but only she's looking up now instead of down, you know, and she still has a tilt, pretty extreme tilt, and looking up quite a bit. So we're gonna do the same thing as last time, essentially. I mean, actually last time I meant to start with the generals, and I ended up using a wolf carbon. This time I'm gonna go generals for my lay-in. So again, just looking for that kind of cranial mass type shape, where I'm just looking kind of really at the shape of the top of her head, and then how wide I want her head to be. You know, and it's going to be tilted because her head's tilted, so oval shape, maybe something like that. And this one's also much less of a 3/4 type pose than the first one. And come and drop down that side plane of the head, which is going to sit over here, and then just kind of double check that angle, make sure it kind of matches what I'm seeing up there. And then again, from back of the head, we can kind of find a rhythm that drops down into the jaw. Find kind of the jaw shape over on this side. Ooh, that didn't look good. Should end up with something about like that, and I'll probably need to adjust it a little bit later, but I mean, that's looking pretty okay for that head shape. Yeah, I don't mind it too much. This might need to come in a little bit. You know, really, I know since she's looking back or has her head tilted back, the shape of the jaw is going to actually flatten out quite a bit down here on the bottom, and then, you know, her head's also tilted, so it's going to be something like that maybe. You know, and their chin's going to sit right about here. And then find that center line, which I don't know. I like to find that center line kind of early on. You don't have to. It can be problematic. It could be good to wait until you kind of have that face shape established, you know? Because typically you want to work from like big shapes to small shapes as much as possible. And so you want to kind of figure out the shape of the face maybe before you put the center line in. Also, I feel like I need to tilt it a bit more maybe. Yeah, probably like that. So then I'm going to come up that up a little bit. Find her hairline, and since her head's tilted back, again, her hairline is going to sit a little bit higher than normal. You know, it looks like it's going to be like way up here. You know, and then I'm going to look for that separation between her ear and the back of her jaw. She's sitting, yeah, right about there. Adjust that side a little bit. It's looking pretty good. So then I'm going to come in. I know her ear is going to sit like way down here. You know, I can come and add her neck onto here, which we're going to have coming kind of that direction, and then kind of from her chin down that way. She has a pretty thin neck, so it looks about right to me. And then her trapezius is going to connect up about there. A little bit lower on the other side. Yeah, looks pretty good. You can kind of find some of that cylindrical shape of the neck if you need to. So then we're going to separate out this hair shape, you know, and find the shape of the face. So her hair is kind of sitting along that way and kind of covering a little bit of her head over here. And then again, coming down this direction. And then cutting kind of back that way, and then kind of swooping back behind her ear. Something like that, and then get a little bit of like sideburn type shape. And here. In there. That's looking like a decent head shape to me. Kind of surprised, because sometimes I have a hard time with extreme tilts. You can see where the ear is. I mean, again, that little thing that I drew last time with the little cylinder, now it's going the opposite direction, right? So we're going to have that same cylinder now tilted the other direction. You know, so if we take that and find those thirds again, top, bottom, middle third, there, and then figure out how those are going to wrap around that cylinder. You know, and say our center line now is over here. You know, now you can see, okay, say that's our hairline, our brow line, nose line, chin, and now the ear is going to drop lower, you know, and that jaw is going to sit more like right about there, which is kind of the effect we're getting here. We can see that ear is dropped really low, partly because of the tilt, but then also because her head's tilted back also, so it's getting like really low because it's got both of those going on. You know, and we're seeing a little bit of her other ear out here on the other side. Not much, I mean, it's just like a tiny, tiny bit. Right about there. So little actually that I might leave it off. I might go back and erase that. So I'm gonna try and get a hair shape on there now, right? So the partner hair sits off that way a little bit. Your head's tilted back, so we're not going to have a big hair shape up here. It's going to be kind of small. It's coming down this way, overlapping some stuff over here. Coming down this direction. And we're getting some hair coming down again, a little overlap past her ear. Coming down that way and then sort of disappearing back behind her head over here. Which, based on that shape I'm looking at right now, I'd say her neck needs to come out more. I think I gave her too much of like a cartoon neck. So it needs to sit a little bit straighter probably. Yeah, looks a little better. That makes this shape look a little better too, which is good. So her hair on the other side is going to sit off that way, and then just kind of contour, or just kind of like follow along her head shape basically. Kind of along there, and then down, and then out kind of over this ear, back that way. And then again, getting those same braids that we had on the other one, kind of coming off this direction. A little bit shorter. Yeah, it looks a lot better. So again, at this point, then we're going to come in and find those same thirds again, and I can even, debating, I don't know, I feel like the center line maybe needs to move a little bit this direction. And then I can just kind of see like where that side plane of her head is going to sit. That separation between like the front and side plane. It's going to sit right about in here. And then we're getting like a tiny bit of that on that side. So again, come in and find those thirds. And even though her head's tilted back, those thirds are going to stay the same because she's not tilted back far enough for that to really matter. What is going to change is, again, the relationship of the ear and the jaw to the rest of the head, and then the tip of the nose is going to move up quite a bit higher. And take your time, come in here and actually measure these thirds, make sure match up. That's actually pretty close. Just gonna double check real quick the angle. Kind of check the angle between the tear ducts and make sure that angle I have for those thirds lines kind of matches. I feel like this angle might actually have been correct the way I had it the first time. More that way and a little more that way. Pretty close. So now I come in here and do the same thing. Come in and find kind of where that keystone shape kind of turns down into the nose. And then that separation for the inside of that other eye socket. And the outside of this eye socket. It's going to sit way out here. you know, and really double check kind of where the edge of that brow is and how much space between there and her hairline there needs to be. And then over here, we're gonna have all the way out to the outside of her head is where that brow is gonna be. And from there, it's gonna come down into cheekbone. That way, and then I feel like I'm seeing too much of that ear right now. So again, real quick, I'm gonna look for the sweep of this nose, just to, unlike last time the nose was really long because her head was tilted down. Now her head's tilted up, so the tip of that nose moves up and then the nose is gonna look shorter. Run kind of this direction. And then real quick, I mean, I can see it's gonna do, kind of come down here. And then maybe just separate out where I think the tip of the nose is gonna be. Right along there. Out to kind of the, you know, separate out that bottom plane of the nose. Something like that, and that shape's gonna need to be adjusted later because that's actually some light stuff going in there, but just structurally, I'm trying to figure out that separation real quick. It's actually gonna be more like that. Then come in and kind of lock together this brow shape from side to side. You know, find the inside of the brow. Kind of come in here, close up these eye sockets maybe, which are going to come in that way. And down, and that's not something that ends up in the final drawing, but it's just almost more like a good habit more than anything. Partly to just understand where they go, and then also to develop the habit of drawing complete shapes. You don't want lines just hanging out there on their own, really. You know, you really want to think in terms of shapes and shape design. So again, take this bottom third, break that into thirds. And if you need to, you can come in and again think about kind of that muzzle shape that projects forward from the center line. Around that way, and then the chin, which also projects forward. And then again, find those thirds. Measure them, make sure that works correctly, and they look pretty close enough. You know, again, run a line, something that I like to do, run a line kind of through where I think the tear ducts are gonna go. Just to help line up the eyes later on when I'm trying to actually draw the eyes, can be helpful. You know, and then kind of find some of those rhythms, find that separation between the brow and the eye up in here. Off that way, and then kind of that inside little pocket up above the eye, the bottom of the brow bone. Sit kind of down in there. Again, the shape of the lips are gonna sit, yeah, about here, I think. I don't know. In the reference, I feel like they're pushed this way a little bit, but I don't know. That seems odd to me, so I'm gonna keep them out where I put that kind of muzzle line. So I mean, you got to spend a lot of time doing studies of features and lips and noses and all that stuff. I mean, we have entire classes dedicated to those, and then certainly in like my fundamentals class, I mean, we spend entire weeks just going over what these facial features are going to look like. Don't like that side though. Lip needs to be longer. You know, kind of finding that lip shape, that kind of like traditional Cupid's bow type shape. I mean, her lips fit that pretty well, so you can almost just go in there and draw, at least for her, kind of those kind of stereotypical, idealized lips, and it'll kind of fit her type. You know, at this point, I'm starting to block in shadow a little bit. Not really block it in, but just starting to map a little bit and figure out some of these edges, which is something I like using the generals for, actually, is the mapping phase. Because I don't know, it's easier to get these like nice soft edges. You can use your finger a little bit with them. That shape though. So at this point, I mean, same thing. I'm going to come in and start mapping some of this stuff. And right off the bat, I can see this really soft edge along the cheek, running down in through here. Is just going to come in and swoop down past the lips, just barely. I feel like I made this a little too wide. You know, nice soft edge down around the chin. You know, really soft edge down around her jaw. And I'm probably going to draw a better ear at this point too, real quick while I'm down here. And again, just using plumb lines, figure out where the bottom of her ear is going to relate to the rest of her head. Should line up about just above her chin. It's right about in there, and that's going to kind of turn into a really soft edge right along her jaw. You know, we're going to have a little bit of a cast shadow coming down onto her neck. So a little bit of a harder edge here into a bit of a softer edge, and then really soft edge kind of as we're just going to soften up as we move away from the head, essentially. Nice and soft down here. Again, come back up. I'm going to probably focus more on the nose at this point because I know I don't really like this shape I put in here for this nose. So I'm going to come in and try and lock that shape down a little bit better. You know, I see that shadow shape kind of coming around here a little bit. And it sort of drops down and cuts across. And then actually meets up with the nostril right in there, and then that connects up with kind of that plane, and then off to the edge of the nostril out here.
Brian, how often do you find yourself modifying the Reilly rhythms depending on like the person's face or their ethnicity or just their overall structure?
Oh, the Reilly rhythms need to be modified almost every single time you use them. You know, I mean, that's part of what's cool about them is that they're so easily modified, and it's easy to bend them to whatever you need them to be and to fit whatever type of person you're drawing. And hopefully you can get familiar with them enough that that becomes really easy after a while, and you can kind of do it without even thinking about it. But right now, I mean, I'm drawing kind of like a younger female, so I'm not even using any of the Reilly rhythms that run kind of through the cheek and the muzzle. I mean, I'm leaving half of them off just because I know I don't want that type of stuff ending up in the finished drawing because it would age her a lot, and it just isn't going to fit her type necessarily. So yeah, I mean, learning to modify them and when to do that is pretty important, I would say. You know, I mean, that's every bit as important as learning how to manipulate all these edges and stuff and, you know, anything else. You know, kind of get that nose shadow shape on there. Not bad. So I've kind of done this backwards a little bit. I mean, usually I would start more in the eye or the nose and work my way down. For whatever reason, I did it the other way. Either way is fine. As long as you have this stuff kind of locked down pretty well, then, you know, once you get into that kind of block-in phase or mapping or whatever, you can kind of start wherever. Come in here, nice soft edge up in the brow. So I know that's going to be a nice rounded form up in there. Again, that shadows, you know, as that form changes is going to end and kind of jump over here. And at this point, I'll probably block in this eye shape real quick. It's kind of a tough eye because, I mean, she's looking, her head's tilted back and she's looking up and off to one direction. So we're getting like a pretty extreme eye shape in here. And it's kind of coming off that direction and coming up, wrapping all the way around. Like that, you know, and then I'm going to come in and add a little bit of that tear duct shape and have maybe a little hard edge for that little cast shadow that might sit in there. come in and find where that iris is going to sit. Right up in there, which should sit about like that. And then we're going to have that cutoff plane about that way. So now, I mean, I know there needs to be room in there to be able to see. And at the 2 value stage, I'm not going to block this in. I just know that shape needs to be big enough that I'm going to be able to see a lot of the underplane of that eyelid. You know, we're going to end up with a shape kind of like that. It's going to come up and then back. You know, include some of that bottom plane of the eyelid type shape in there, or at least leave room for it. You know, and then we're getting some shadow kind of around the brow. Which I don't really like that shape. Let's nice soft edge in there. And then we're going to have kind of a hard edge up here. And then the rest of that eyelid shape coming down that direction. And then that little cast shadow coming off that way, and then down kind of that direction. Oh, and a little bit of that bottom lid. So same thing at this point. I mean, I would come in, and we're seeing not a lot of shadow over here. Really getting a little bit of shadow under her brow, but it's pretty far over compared to that shadow. A little bit of shadow right there. She has a pretty wide kind of keystone shape in there. So make sure to account for that. We're going to come in and find the other tear duct, which is going to sit, I think, about there. You know, if you need to, you can get up there and actually measure that distance and say, yeah, maybe they're 1 eye length apart, which is about exactly where I put it, which is good. You know, the other way is to kind of follow that line that kind of goes from either the back of the nostril up to the tear duct, or some people's nostrils expand out past that point, and you have to look more for kind of the separation between the side plane of the nose and the cheek, you know, and figure out where that point is. And that should lead you back up to the tear duct also.
How much of the Loomis head are you using? Or is that influenced?
Not much. I did almost 0 Loomis heads. I mean, I've seen them. I know what they look like, and I know that Eric and Jeff and Ben, I mean, all those guys studied the heck out of Loomis heads. And so since I studied all their heads, I've basically studied Loomis heads without actually studying Loomis heads. And I own all the Loomis books, and I spent a lot of time looking at them. So I know what they look like, and I know I do similar stuff. But I didn't actually spend a lot of time sitting down and drawing Loomis heads specifically. But there's nothing wrong with it. I mean, they're good heads, for sure. I just happened to be at the school where I had, you know, a bunch of people around that I could copy rather than having to use the Loomis books. And here, find this other iris, which is going to sit right about there. Again, a little bit of a cast shadow here. It's going to kind of soften up as it moves down this way. And then we're getting a little bit of shadow underneath this eyelid. You know, and again, since her head's tilted back, we're not seeing the top plane of the bottom eyelid. You know, her eyelid's just kind of cutting straight across here. Same with this one. You know, instead, when we go to render later, we would include a lot of the bottom plane of the top lid. Oh, that's not good. So then just kind of find that separation between the top eyelid and the actual brow shape, which is going to sit right about there, and then cut in that way a little bit. We'll get a little bit of shadow there, and then we're going to get shadow there, and maybe a little bit of a hard edge right there. I mean, that looks good, but I feel like this eye right now is a little bit taller than that one, which is a bit of a problem. In the drawing, it looks weird. When I look up in the reference, it's actually the same way, which is probably just like something, you know, I mean, every single person's head is more asymmetrical than you'd think. But when we draw them, it's kind of good to, I don't know, add some of the more symmetricalness back into them if you can. Because I know, I don't know, the way our brain works, like if you look at something like this in a drawing, our brain's going to interpret it as having been drawn incorrectly because they know a human made it. Versus if you look at a photo and see something like that, then we know it's a representation of reality, and our brains will just kind of accept it. So I'm going to come in and actually maybe shrink this one a little bit. Not a lot. Mostly I think it's just where it peaks. Looks a little bit odd. Yeah, actually that looks a lot better. You know, there's a small difference, but it was enough to kind of bother me. Then her hair is kind of overlapping her forehead a little bit. Right here. Just kind of shooting off that way and that way. That looks pretty good. So I mean, I feel like I got some decent edges established. You can see using the General's pencil as opposed to the Wolf Carbon on the last one, it has a little bit different look to it maybe. It's a little messier, to be honest, because it tends to sit just on top of the page a lot more and kind of float around. And so as you move your arm around, it tends to get kind of messy, but in a way that's kind of nice because it kind of helps push those soft edges and exaggerate them a little bit more. I do feel like this little section down in here kind of bothers me a little bit. So I'm going to actually bring this down a touch. Yeah, that looks better. And then her jaw, we're going to round that out. Shrink up that ear shape even more because we should just be seeing like a little tiny sliver of it. I get maybe it's okay. Should be sitting right about there. It's going to be overlapped by hair right about there. That's not bad. So I mean, now I'm going to come in and start filling this in. Oh, except we're seeing more ears, so I'm going to block in an ear shape real quick. Ears, I mean, I'm not going to explain all the ear parts, but they're not as complex as you think. When you first try and draw them, they seem really kind of weird and foreign. But I don't know, to me, ears are actually one of the more simple things to draw on the head, because nobody's going to know if you captured an ear likeness correctly, you know, so they have a lot of room for, not for error, but just for, I don't know, just designing a cool ear and not worrying about exactly how it looks, you know. It just needs to read like an ear. And they don't have all that many parts, really. I mean, you can sit down in an afternoon and just do some ear studies and learn all the parts pretty quickly. And after that, it's just a matter of how you design them. I feel like that ear is a little small, actually. Man, let me see. I draw a plumb line straight over. Her ear should sit below her nostril, but not quite that much. I'm actually going to make this ear bigger. Say, bring it up to about there. Which again, it's a small difference, but I think it's going to be the difference between looking correct and looking kind of weird and small. Or maybe I'm just too picky. I don't know. So we'll move this shape up. So, I mean, you can't be too, I don't know, too attached to the things that you draw. You know, and I know someone asked earlier, like, why we simplify things, and I should have included part of the reason for that is because it makes it easier to change things as we go along, you know. And if you put, like, you take the time to draw some really detailed nose, you know, and it looks awesome, but then all of a sudden you realize it's like the wrong size in relation to the rest of the head, you're going to be really hesitant to go in and erase it and take it out and change it because you spent so much time on it. You know, and you want to avoid that, you know, because really the best way to fix something like that is to just redo it and not be so attached to it that you're hesitant to do that. You know, so just really simplifying things and keeping things as simple as you can is going to help with that, help you avoid that problem. Yeah, looks better. I think the earlobe's a little big. Yeah, there we go. So again, same thing. Let's switch back to one of these wolf carbons. Somewhere I have another one. I think it's sharpened up. Yeah. Let's start filling this stuff in again. So again, kind of doing this all on the downstroke and trying to make sure I just end up with two values and not multiple values shown in there. You could include more of the eyebrow on here. I kind of left them off just to stick with the main forms of the head, you know, and I didn't actually include much eyebrow out here, but you can block that in too if you want. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. Or you can wait and add it on later. You know, and then really watch as you do this and make sure you don't lose those soft edges that you put in there. I can see this one, I think I've softened up a little bit more. It's pretty close. Sorry, I'm looking at the distance between this shape and this shadow shape. And it looks kind of big to me, but honestly, I think that would get filled in with halftone because there's a shape that actually sits in here, kind of. And so when I include that, that actually seems more reasonable. I think that was kind of like an optical illusion almost. You know, then it's time to come in and just kind of really start filling in these bigger areas. Well, maybe I'll fill in the ear first. Come in here, really get up on the side of the pencil. All same direction, all in the downstroke. It's tough. I mean, I'm kind of, I don't know, new to these wolf carbons, and they're a little bit thinner, so I always feel like I'm about to break them. I have a hard time just like powering in those dark values like I would with the Conte. But they actually seem pretty durable. I haven't actually broken one yet, which is good. So again, same thing as before with the hair. I mean, the hair is pretty dark, so I'm going to try and put in that darker local value first. On that little part. I'm going to come in, and I know that ear's in shadow also. Block in all of this. And all of this. I feel like I drew weirdly small braids over here. Beef those up a little bit. It's not bad. I'm going to say, okay, so there's our local hair value. And then we want to create a 2-value drawing for the hair also. So come in and identify some shadow shapes. And there's certainly a bunch of shadow over here. You know, it sort of disappears into shadow kind of along here. I have a nice separation between her brow and kind of the side of her head and the hair. I'm actually going to bring her brow, that kind of brow shape out here in a tiny bit. And bring this hair shape down a little bit also. Fill that in. Not bad. And then on this side, we're kind of getting shadow coming back here behind the ear. Down in here. You know, getting this really clear ear separation. And then shadow certainly back in here. You know, keep those edges pretty soft right around there. And then fill that in. And this time I'm not going to put the highlights in because that kind of screwed everything up last time. Save that for when you're trying to actually render hair. But I'm going to darken this kind of braid structure a little bit more. Braid out here, and then figure out where that shadow starts, which is going to be down on here a bit. And come in and darken up all of this. And there's a little bit of shadow right in there. I mean, it's looking pretty good to me. I might come in and adjust a couple little things, but I mean, I think this is pretty much it. You know, if you want, you can go in and kind of erase a lot of these like construction lines. And you should even probably do that before you start filling it in necessarily, or immediately after you fill it in. But you certainly don't want those construction lines left on there when it comes time to actually render the thing, because they're just going to get in the way. It doesn't matter if they, like, you can still see them that they're really light on there. That's kind of okay, because the thing with the Reilly Rhythms is even if they're on there a little bit, they'll help describe the form. You just don't want them so dark that they interfere with like the halftone values that you end up putting on there. End up throwing off that kind of value structure of the whole head. For some reason there's a little dark spot right in there that kind of bothers me a little bit. Yeah, that's better. And I think that is pretty much it. So yeah, I mean, thanks to everybody that watched. I mean, I don't know how many of you are there, but I appreciate it. And certainly, I mean, you know, we always have kind of new streaming classes you guys can take, and the online school. I mean, you get all sorts of this stuff at the online school and the streaming classes, both. You know, the streaming classes are pretty awesome. They're like the best way I've seen so far to actually, you know, they come the closest to actually being in class. You know, but then the online school actually takes things a lot farther, and they're kind of the best option I've seen for actually like a full training program from the ground up. And I don't know, they're pretty unique programs, so they might be worth checking out if you're interested in this stuff. And I mean, you can find them both at the Watts Atelier website. So yeah, that's pretty much it. So yeah, thanks everybody. Thank you for watching, and I am done.